Hi everyone, welcome to Beyond the Evidence. This is the channel where justice matters. My name is Marv. I am a true crime fanatic, and I love to dig deeper into the mysteries of unsolved cases. Join me as we search for missing persons, uncover the clues in unsolved murders, follow along with jury trials, and we'll be a voice for the voiceless. I'll share with you the facts, the theories, the clues, the evidence, and the controversies that surround these cases. This is Beyond the Evidence. Good evening, everyone. I am just getting home, flying in the door, setting up the live, and there's a lot to talk about on day 10 of the Richard Allen trial. Oh my goodness, my phone is actually automatically typing out everything I say to you guys. So we'll turn that off. Hello, Jill. How are you? Stephanie, nice to see you. Karen G. Lollipop, how you doing? Andrea will be in here shortly. Okay, so it is Monday. We're starting a new week. And today we heard from the DNA expert and the blood spatter expert. Kind of a another emotional day. Some photos were shown, and let me tell you, they don't get any easier. They really don't. But we've got a lot of information to give out, so we're going to get started here. Richard Allen was wearing a green and white plaid shirt, khaki pants, glasses on his head, came in and just sat down. He has not been happy in the courtroom the past few days. Judge Gall enters at 9:01, requests the jury be brought in. The jury arrives at 9:04. Gall welcomes the jury back, lets us know that they had an activity on Saturday and a family visit on Sunday, and they got their electronics, and they had to reaffirm their oath. The first witness today was Stacy Bonzanowski. She is an ISP forensic scientist, a DNA analyst. Her role is a forensic scientist. She develops DNA profiles, does STR technology, field that is continuously changing and updating. Boy, do we know that. She's got a Bachelor of Science, a Master of Forensic of Science, went through specialized training, and belongs to a few organizations. ISP is an accredited AMST. This ensures the reliability and credibility of their work. They gave a copy of her resume to the court, outlines her experiences, education, organizations, training. She has 18 years of experience doing this. Then we had the lawyers request to approach the bench for a sidebar. So they talked about some general things when it comes to DNA. Quality assurance process. Yes, this process assures accuracy of results, monitors procedures and protocol, and identifies issues. Gave components Examples: internal, external controls, DNA biological material. This tells us how body is built, passed on, found in all cellular areas of the body. So I'm not going to go through a bunch of this preliminary stuff to show that she's an expert. We're going to just get down into the dirty of what was tested and what results were found. Okay, just making sure. DNA extraction is the quantification of how much DNA you can amplify it, create millions of copies separated by size and used to create DNA profile. Genes are small, I'm going to take my glasses off here. Sections of DNA. Single source versus mixture. What is it? Single source is a profile from one individual. Mixture is DNA profile comes from 2 or more people. Quantification is how much is present, how much DNA is present. If not enough, will not continue through stages. We're going to hear that a lot. If enough, may be suitable for analysis and to determine a DNA profile. And they may not be able to determine a DNA profile if there's not enough DNA material. Okay. So they said, did you look at DNA in this case? Yes. She issued a report on 3/7/2017. Exhibit 174 was Abby. 175 was Libby. Items were examined and marked for identification. Okay. There's a series of items for Abby that were tested. Okay. Here we go. Vaginal swabs, anal swabs, internal swabs, fingernail, pubic hair. No seminal fluids were found. Vaginal swabs, possible DNA, male DNA. So she looked at the genital swab, one fingernail, presence of DNA, insufficient amount of DNA, so no additional analysis or profile created. She said she could have done serological testing on a lot of this, but it would have taken up a lot of the material and then they wouldn't have had enough for DNA. So they pretty much did DNA testing on all of these items. So there was cervical and vaginal swabs. No male DNA found. Areas where there was male DNA, fingernail from both, external genital swab. Does not indicate it is from perpetrator. The male DNA was just a little bit. So then we get into all of these exhibits that they talked about, and these are different items that they tested. So this was March 7th, received on 2/17/2017 laboratory. Trace exam received afterwards. So they gave her a bunch of packages and she identified them because it had the case number, the item number, and her initials on it. So they had standard DNA for Abby and Libby. And that is what some of this is what she used to match this to. So there was swabs from Libby. Possible presence of blood. Another item, serological for blood. So they're looking for male DNA. So they looked at her upper thigh, left thigh, breast. No male DNA was found. All of it was insufficient, and they sent nothing for further testing. The left wrist, right wrist, thigh, fibrous material. So the left wrist, no male DNA was found. The right wrist, no male DNA was found. Number 22 was blood, was present. There was a slight amount. No male DNA, insufficient for further analysis. So nothing there. The thigh, same thing. No male DNA, insufficient for further analysis. There was fibrous material. It was a hair from Abby's left pinky. No DNA. They did swabs of Libby for the fibrous material and found blood. So then they had fibrous material from the hand of Abby, human hair, had a root, but not enough to have a DNA profile. Left arm of Abby. This was another hair. Same thing, not enough DNA to further testing. Then they looked at the tree, what's supposedly the F tree, but in court they call it the L tree. There was possible blood. A DNA profile was found. This blood was consistent with Libby's DNA. Okay. Hair on Abby's finger, female, unknown profile. Not consistent with Abby and Libby. They thought it was a biological relative of Libby. March 2017 received DNA strand or DNA standard profile of Derek German. DNA profile created from the hair. It's a relative of Liberty German. Familial relationship, some consistency to a relative of Derek's. Abby found wearing Libby's sweatshirt. And the hair on it was female and a relative. This was communicated to investigators, but not in a report. So in 2024, she received Kelsey's DNA. The hair in Abby's hand is consistent with Kelsey's DNA. So it was Kelsey's hair. So the next object was the cartridge. Received time of autopsy. Examined part of original submission 2/17/2017. Came in a brown paper bag in an envelope. There was also loose debris. No physical ridge detail, meaning no fingerprints. One swab had light brown dirt stain. They did a visual exam. They attempted to collect skin cells. There was dirt on the swab, which could impact getting a profile. So they removed the manila envelope, opened the white paper that this was sealed in by the edges. They examined the paper for trace evidence to preserve. They removed the bullet from the cartridge from the envelope. And it was a 40 caliber Smith & Wesson. They said it needed additional analysis. They did not put any markings on there. They looked for a print. Nearly impossible to do print and DNA. And this is because the item is so small. There's not a lot of surface area on it. They needed a larger sample. Cartridges are not successful, and they actually removed DNA testing in 2017 after this in all the labs because it does not have a big enough surface area to get prints or any skin cells to get a DNA profile. She took a swab. DNA results were insufficient findings for DNA analysis, which we kind of figured. After she told us about it's too small of a surface area. Next were 2 Converse shoes that Abby had on. Number 146 was the right shoe. It had a spot of discoloration blood stain. What looked like a discoloration blood stain. No blood detected. 147 is the left shoe. Blood was present outside the tongue of the shoe. They took 8 swabs. Then number 177 was the sweatshirt. And 178 was the jeans. Okay, so partial DNA couldn't be determined. No conclusions. Failed quantification. Not enough DNA detected to get a profile. So then they had 14 and 15. It was heavily soiled, had dirt and plant material. The shoes were very dirty. Every part of the shoe, they had dirt embedded in the fabric. And they did find a DNA profile, and it belonged to 2 people. It was a mixture. And those 2 people were Liberty German and Abigail Williams. It says hair was collected, but it was not human hair. So the sweatshirt was black, had blood on it, upper shoulder, neck, plant material, dirty, with sandy soil. They used an ultralight source to try to detect anything else that could have been on the sweatshirt. There was blood detected, no seminal fluids. They took 11 cuttings, so they snipped out 11 areas, and 3 swabs outside the cuff and pockets. They found hair, and it had root material. 8 of the cuttings, it came back to Abby. 3 of the cuttings, it came back to Libby and Abby. They could not be excluded. The hair, unfortunately, was insufficient. They took 3 swabs. Out of the swabs, 1 came back with blood from Abby. 2 swabs had a mixture, but they were not able to determine the mixture of that. The jeans were heavily dirt stained, sand, and a lot of mud. There was blood, but no seminal. They took 10 cuttings and 2 swabs, 1 inside the crotch and 1 on the button. Hair collected with root. There was not enough DNA or not enough of the root to get a DNA profile. This is very frustrating hearing all this. 1 of the cuttings belonged to Abby. The second cutting, this is where things got interesting. The second cutting belonged to LG, meaning Libby, and a lab technician. So basically, they could not determine male DNA profile due to an inadequate amount of DNA present on all of these items. That was the frustrating part. So the next section was items behind Abby and the crime scene and the creek. The first item that they looked at was the pink top from Abby. It had blood, no semen. And it came back as DNA of Abby's. Then they looked at the gray bra, and it also had blood, no semen. Came back as Abby's DNA. The black bra, no semen. And there was no other testing because it didn't have anything else on it. So, the pink top, hair, there was hair. 2 hairs with root. The first one came back as Abby. The second one, there was not enough DNA to test. The gray bra, they took 2 cuttings, 3 swabs, and there was a hair. The 2 cuttings all came back as Abby's DNA. The 3 swabs came from the breast, inside and out, and then skin cells. So 1 came back to Abby. The third one came back as a mixture. And the second one was Abby. And they were not able to determine the other one. Then we go to the black bra. They took 4 cuttings, 2 swabs, and found 4 hairs. 2 of the cuttings came back with Abby's DNA. 2 of the cuttings came back with a mixture of Abby's, and then no conclusion on the other one. 2 swabs, inside breast, came back as Abby's DNA. The 4 hairs did not have enough root or no root on them, and they failed to have enough to test for a DNA profile. So next was the black Nike shoe of Libby that was found underneath Abby. There was blood on the shoe. They took 7 swabs and they found a hair consistent with animal. Let's see. Oh, they took 7 swabs and then they took 2 other swabs. Okay, so out of the 7, 3 of them came back as Abby. 4 of them did not have enough DNA to test further. The other swabs came back, one came back as Abby, and one was a mixture that they couldn't determine. So she said it's hard to test shoes because they have dirt. We wear them every day and we'll collect a lot of DNA as we are walking around. So DNA could have been picked up from anywhere. Okay, then they looked at 40 through 43, 46 and 47. Trees and ground around Libby German. 44 and 45 was the ground, the blood from the ground. That came back and matched the DNA profile of Abby. 48 and 49, left index finger and pinky of Libby. Possible blood. It was found that it was Libby's DNA. 7 swabs were taken from the ground, tree, and Abby. The only profile they found was Abby's. The fingers of LG, the ground by the tree below LG's head and around the tree had a red stain on the tree. All of that was found to be Libby's DNA. Then we go to items from the creek. So there was a sweatshirt from the creek, underwear, 2 socks, a green scarf, and a tank top. There was a Nike shoe, blue jeans, and a tie-dyed shirt. Now, when items are found in the creek, it poses challenges when trying to get DNA. Whatever DNA you have on there degrades because it's in the water and the sunlight. So there's a potential to remove or dilute any DNA, dirt, or bacteria on these items. Shoe of Libby German. They asked her if she was surprised to find out that this shoe that was underneath Abby was actually Libby's shoe. She said she found, or she did a swab on the side of the shoe on the rubber, and the DNA was consistent with Abby, even though it was Libby's shoe. So somehow, some of Abby's blood got onto Libby's shoe that was found in the creek. Blue jeans. There was a mixture of DNA found. The major component came from Abby. The minor came from Libby. The profile limited falling below thresholds. Can't determine how many other DNA might be in that mixture. Then we go back to the blue jeans. Heavily muddy. There was 7 areas that they tested. No blood, no semen. They did cuttings, no detection of DNA. They found a hair. There was not sufficient amount of anything to test for DNA. The gray shirt, slightly dirty, cleaner than the other ones, but it had these streaky marks on it, and they had theorized that that was from detergent, from being washed. No blood or semen. They took 7 swabs and 1 cutting, but there was a partial amount of DNA, but not enough to test for a DNA profile. This was frustrating listening to this, you guys. The underwear, no blood or semen. They took 1 cutting and 2 swabs. The swab was from inside the crotch. The second swab was the waistband. All of this came back with a DNA profile of Abby. Then they have the black sock. No blood. 2 swabs. This failed to produce any DNA for further testing. They did find 1 hair with a root, but the root did not have enough DNA for further testing. There was a pink sock, no blood, 5 swabs, 3 hairs. Once again, not enough DNA to send for a DNA profile. The green scarf was old, embedded with mud, no blood, no analysis was done because they determined that that had been there for a while. Tank top, heavy dirt and mud, no blood or semen. They swabbed the breast, failed to bring back any DNA. Then they did a swab of the tree to see if they could get any skin cells, to see who touched it. No results. Did not find profile of male. Could not identify any male profile. So the next report that came out was 4/11 of 2017. They did a re-examination of the black sweatshirt. And they did a swab of her iPhone. So there was 2 swabs from the cell phone. There was a mixture, but not enough to do a DNA profile, so no conclusion was drawn. Black hoodie. So they took all the additional samples. They took 3 swabs, and some of it was not exposed to the creek, so they were trying to take from the front sleeves and the back of the sleeves. They did 22 swabs altogether. What they found was one mixture, 3 individuals, Abby, Libby, and an unknown male. They entered this information into CODIS. They enhanced the profile with new technologies. They matched it to a lab employee. The first time they did this, the lab employee was not in the employee database yet. So that is why they did not come up with a match. This prompted major changes for their protocol. And the possible use of a mask when they're close to items. So, male DNA was found on the sweatshirt. Could not get a profile. Not enough DNA quantification. And they said living in a home, it's not uncommon for other DNA to be there. When you wash your clothes, it does not remove all the DNA. Clothing can hold on to DNA. I did not know that until today. That was crazy. July 11th, 2017 report. This exam took place at the ISP post in a secure location in an outbuilding. They made sure that they had a sterile environment and looked at 3 branches. They looked for blood and skin cells. 7 swabs of each branch were conducted. They swabbed them for blood. All of the swabs from the branches failed to come up with a DNA profile. See the theme here? So, then they looked at 547 and 548. 547 was positive for blood, and it was Libby's. 548, positive for blood, came back with Libby's DNA. Branches pose problems covered in dirt and plant material. Branches pose difficult in inhibitors in degrading. Oh, yeah, because it can degrade being out in the elements. The jeans on Abby and the clothes in the creek were exposed to water and sunlight. So they said on the cartridge that this is difficult in getting a DNA profile or fingerprints because it's a small surface, minimally handled. This is why we did not see pictures of them taking the bullet out of the ground, holding it up, having a photo taken, put in an envelope and sealed. They don't do that because the surface is so small. They don't want anything to happen to that cartridge. They carefully take it out of the ground, put it in the envelope, and send it for testing. It takes 20 to 50 cells that are needed. So your skin cells takes 20 to 50 that are needed to get a DNA profile. And they're saying because it's such a small surface area, you do not get enough skin cells on that area. And therefore, it's almost impossible to get a DNA profile from it. The hairs. Now, they said hairs shed on the body. The follicles and skin cells shrink. Not successful most of the time in getting a DNA profile from hairs for this reason. They tested 80 hairs. No DNA profile could be made. It's not a good source for DNA testing. And hair can be transferred around the house wherever you go. Rootless hair, no root, no skin. Did you send hair to FBI? They did send a set to the FBI. So they asked about a screening source provided. She said lab is limited. Sent to FBI, not consistent with victims. Mitochondrial. So the defense was asking, why didn't they do a mitochondrial test? And they said technology changes and there's a variety of hairs. And then she said 3 hairs and there was objection. So they found 3 hairs not consistent with Abby and Libby. They sent 72 hairs to the FBI and inquired what could be done next to see about getting some kind of DNA profile. Her and her supervisor researched what technology was available to them, low for rootless hair, and wait for advancement. That is what they came up with. They said if they continued to try to do additional testing on those hairs, it would consume the hair and they would not have anything left to test in the future if advancements were made. Due to this recommendation, no further testing was done. This was a decision made by law enforcement not to test further. It's a delicate balance, she said. Then we talked about touch DNA, looking for skin cells. She was asked, was my DNA there? And I put yes in court. She's talking about touch DNA and she says she called it momentarily contact. That's when you just briefly touch something, okay? It's different than wearing an item. Depends on several factors, determines if touch DNA is there. So, if you're wearing an item, it's rubbing on your body, you're going to slough off skin cells. It's easier to find touch DNA or something on something that's worn versus if you just quick touch something. She said there's good and bad sources for DNA. Gloves are always worn, or if gloves were worn, it would prevent transfer, but could be on the outside of the gloves. And then they asked her, well, if you have clothing items left behind, weapons left behind, would you examine them? And she said, yes, examine them. Handling versus touching. The amount deposited, the frequency of the touching versus touching very limited contact. Frequency of use is an important factor. So the more you touch something, the more your touch DNA is on it. And you have a chance to get a DNA profile. Shudder, that's me. Familiar with some people can shed more DNA. Some people shed more than others. I can tell you I'm probably one of those, especially when I have longer hair, that I shed more often than others. Competitive nature of touch DNA. Blood is the biggest, best way to get a DNA profile. Swabs for skin cells, but blood is the predominant way and better source of DNA versus skin cells. Then I put if the killer touched her shoulder or neck, could this affect the ability to see the DNA? Touch sample with blood is nearly impossible. So Libby had blood everywhere. And if the person had touched her shoulder or her hand, and because she had blood in those areas, when you have touch DNA mixed with blood, it's nearly impossible to get a DNA profile from the touch DNA. They asked if Richard Allen's DNA was found on any items. Answer, no. No male profile available and to compare it to. Then the judge admonished the galley. Several people were falling asleep, and she said there's no sleeping in the courtroom. Then we took a lunch break. Auger got up for the defense, and I want to tell you something, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Today was probably one of the best days for defense questions from Auger. And I know that I've talked to you before about this and the third-party defense, and that there's a proper way to do a third-party defense. Well, we saw that today from Auger. They didn't have to bring any information about Odinist or anything like that in, or name people. She did it the right way with the two witnesses we had today. She was talking about new emerging technology, more aware of, and I couldn't quite hear what she said. And she was talking about hair and a new extraction method, looking at DNA from the shaft of the hair. So she said criminal cases have been solved by the analysis used in sequencing analysis and genealogy. And the lady was like, not if there's low levels of DNA. There has to be a good amount of DNA before that can be done. So in these other cases that were solved by this, it was because they had enough DNA to use methods to get a DNA profile and find the killer. Then she wanted to talk about the process of validating the lab and to improve extractions. There's a new tool to use, and she kept saying the Smith analysis for DNA. And the expert said it depends on what we are talking about. Not to be used on hair. That they are, and then she said, well, what about the expansion you're doing to your forensic technology? She said, Smith can't be used on hair. If sample meets threshold with the Smith analysis, private companies are using this to get a DNA profile. So she said that they mostly use this forensic genealogy for cases that they're trying to solve by validating each sequencing, but you need 200, I think she said loci, for missing person cases. And then Auger said, well, in these Smith case, or in the Smith analysis, they can look at 10,000. Why is it that you can't? And she said they're combining techniques to generate profiles using the Smith analysis. The expert stated that they do not have that technology, that these are private companies that are doing this. She said the reason she kept the hairs was so that she didn't consume them and could later test them if new technologies were brought to their lab. So they're holding on to 72 hairs. They consulted companies and investigators, and she said the laboratory chose not to send this to one of these private companies to try to get a DNA profile. And she said investigators chose not to test it further. They would be able to test it if decided to later. At this time, the outside lab evidence, let's see, they would be able to test it if they decided to later. At this time, they chose not to send it to an outside lab. So the defense was mad because these hairs were not sent to a private lab to get completed or started. Basically trying to point out once again how law enforcement is not following through and doing certain things. So May 20th, 2020, the FBI sent a report back. There were 36 items identified. Told if microscopic testing was requested, they should submit head samples, meaning samples from individuals that they know. No samples have been submitted. Then Auger said, well, why not? Because the way that they do this microscopic testing, it would not use up the hair for analysis. And the woman said, yes. But the state police lab only performs what tests they're requested to do. If evidence warrants it, depends on testing, DNA comparisons, they may compare to unknown examples if it's submitted. Okay, and then she wanted to know about the hair from Abigail's right hand. They knew it was female hair and probably related to LG. The woman said yes, that there was genetic consistencies, that it was a family member. And she said, well, you had BP, Becky Patty, and Kelsey Siebert, Siebert's DNA. And she said, no, I did not. They received that DNA profile for Becky Patty and Kelsey about 2 weeks ago. So then she said the March 7, 2017 report had a hair that was unidentified. She said, no one asked you to compare it? And the woman said, yes. They were only looking for male DNA. And Auger said, well, you found 2 unknown female hairs. One was from the sheet that was in the body bag of one of the girls. Oh, it was on the sheet for Libby German. And it was consistent with a female. So Auger said, you found 1 unknown male DNA and 2 female profiles for DNA. But the 1 male that was found was from the lab. And you didn't think to try to find out who this belonged to for the female hairs? And once again, she said, we compared to whatever detectives submitted. She had some case info saying to look for male DNA. They followed the procedures and that they thought the perpetrator was a male. That is why they were looking for the male DNA on all evidential items. On the SA kits, they looked for male DNA only. Did not develop DNA profile for the women. She said, how do you obtain DNA for comparedness? She said, Ellie submits the DNA for comparison. Hundreds of DNA standards received, meaning they got hundreds of people's DNA where they actually knew who the DNA profile belonged to. So then she asked, Other than the girls and the families, you received one DNA profile out of hundreds. And then the prosecution objected, said it was out of scope. If multiple people involved, the woman has case info. So many results were mixtures. Some said 2 or 3 people. And she said, can you limit the extraction to 3 people? You can't, and she was told, you can't determine the number of contributors. There's not enough info to determine how many people actually contributed to the mixture. And then she said, are there procedures in place to limit contamination? There's one unnamed male DNA that was an employee. And then she was kind of trying to find out, Auger was trying to find out who this employee was. And the woman said to her, it could have been somebody at the lab, but it could have also been for the troopers, because if they work with the lab, they're in the database since they handle evidence. Okay. They asked if there was any other testing. Not aware of any. She didn't have any male assistants. They asked if she reviewed and examined things from Richard Allen's home. Answer, yes. Examine them? Yes. Any connection to Abby or Libby? No. The coat? Yes, they tested it. The carpet from the car? Yes, they tested it. Black boots? Yes, tested it. Knives? Yes, tested them. No evidence of DNA of Libby or Abby on any of these items. So there was hundreds of items tested, hundreds. Did you put a lot of work and time into this? Yes. Nothing connects to Libby or Abby. No. So then the prosecution got back up there. No DNA profile with Richard Allen on any other male. She said correct. So then they were talking about the Smith analysis. Did you attempt to validate any one available? FBI did microscopic and had instructions. Just said to submit. Is it a legitimate form for DNA profile? Do not do hair comparedness. FBI uses it as an investigative tool, not a comparison tool. So she used every method available to the ISP and exhausted all resources trying to come up with ways to test these other hairs. And she said, but other labs can do these things, and yours can't? And she said, yes. Cigarette butts with genealogy, as an example? She said, yes. Then the jury had a bunch of questions. So I put, basically, defense wanted to know why hairs were not sent to another company to get tested, because that could prove a different perpetrator was the killer versus Richard Allen. And then I have a note here to look more at the Smith's analysis for DNA, which we will do another time. Juror questions. What type of controls do you use? Prepare steps. Make sure that the date, time, you log everything, your initials are on it, and any expiration dates, etc. Do you do repetitive testing? No. They used to do duplicate testing, but now this is part of their validation process before they even put a process into place. So it's like it's like testing a new process or procedure. Okay? Before you even put the process into place for your employees to do, you do all kinds of testing, duplicate it, make sure the results come up the same way. If there's anything that doesn't, you find out why and you fix it, and then you put that procedure in place. And part of the reason they do that is to make sure it's reproducible and the results can be validated at that time. Do multiple people perform multiple phases? She said no. An analyst performs all the way from the start to the finish. She performed the analysis. And then there was a question about storage refrigeration. And they said that each one is personally stored in a box, and it's always locked. And then they want to know, do you have a restrictive access policy in place? And she said yes. Only people with badges can get in. No one else can get in to the lab unless they are brought in with another employee. Somebody asked if toxins from drugs could alter DNA. She couldn't say it would affect the cellular structure for DNA or not. And then they asked, what is PCR? And I didn't catch the P because I didn't hear, but it's something chain reaction, and it amplifies the DNA. Okay, I think this is where she's talking about copying the DNA, because the next question is, are you changing the DNA when you're copying it? No, just making copies. when low DNA amounts may give inaccurate results. That's it. Yeah, that is definitely it, Stephanie. Thank you. Okay. Then we're going to get into Pat Cicero. But I need like 3 minutes so that I can go to the bathroom. It's been a long day. So listen to some of the cheesy music that they allow me to play. And I'll be right back. Okay, I am back. I'm going to take a look at comments here real quick. Thank you so much, Karen. She says, thanks, Marv, for all your hard work. I really appreciate that. Yes, DNA will continue to improve, so they may be able to retest it again someday. Well, OJ said, well, that does not help Richard Allen now. He's on trial now, not later. I believe he wanted to SA them, but Weber's van on private lane and hearing other people. I'm thinking you're on the right track. Nick, I can absolutely tell you that statement is absolutely true. And Enoch says, it's okay to cry and to be upset. It's been hard news today. You are absolutely right. And I can tell you that after the last break, I went outside and broke down again. Because in this next part, when we're talking about blood spatter, they were showing different pictures of the girls again today. And it was tough. I was sitting right behind the family, and my heart just broke for Libby's mom. Um, I believe he was hoping someone else got blamed for it. I think so. He knew they wouldn't find DNA because he wasn't able to assay them. He covered it well. Yeah. I don't know about the hazmat suit, but um and I haven't heard anything about him smoking. Yes, this is the word, polymerase or whatever it is, to amplify DNA and create enough copies for testing. Yes. There was no mention of taking any samples from their mouth and teeth. I think he stood back, made these girls do what he forced them to do, and then he stepped in and unalived. Yeah, they definitely tried to find a DNA profile. They really did. The amount of stuff that they tested was a lot. And it just sucks that they could not get the DNA profile. Yeah, you can, and that's what she's saying, you can, but their lab is not equipped to do that. That there's private companies out there that are doing it. Um, they have not said anything about searching his mother's home. There wasn't enough to replicate. When you have a very small amount and you replicate it, it causes inaccuracies. That is what she said. Yeah, and these criminals are getting sneakier and sneakier because there was no DNA at the Daybell crime scene either. Misty, thank you for gifting a membership. Please let me know who got it. Yeah, you know, there's been no mention of her house getting searched. And you're right, that would have been a great place to look. I can tell you this, you guys, and it's freaky. When those crime scene photos are on the television, he just stares at them repeatedly, stares at them. Or he had some kind of gloves on. Congratulations, Lollipop. Yeah, he definitely had gloves. Definitely had access to that stuff. Yes, I was in court today, all day. And yes, they did say there was a chance that it could have been washed off. All right. I'm looking for any questions. Not, I thought 72 hairs was a lot too, but when you think about it and the amount of shedding of hairs that we do and don't actually see ourselves, I'm not surprised now. Yeah, if I'm not seeing your comments or reading them right now, put them down below the video and I will definitely look at them and respond. Yes, they did say that. And that's coming up here. Let's see here. Oh, yes, the items that were taken from Ari's home are on the Beyond the Evidence Facebook group page, as well as other documents and videos from local media. Andrea has been great in making sure that our Facebook group has been staying updated while I am in court. And I thank her very much for that. I don't know why ever since they started presenting evidence that he is BG and all that, his mood has changed. And he has not been happy. Oh, I got more than 72 hairs in my vacuum cleaner. Okay. Let's get to the splatter testimony. So, blood stain pattern analysis. That is what we heard about this afternoon from Pat Cicero. He's a major in LaPorte County Sheriff's, 22 years. He was 20 years as a detective. 9 years of that was chief of detectives. Talked about a lot of the training he did. CSI crime scene investigator, entomology, the the certifications he has, and the training that he does. So he's worked several hundred cases on blood stain pattern analysis. Done work for several counties. Has testified in numerous trials. He's done over 20 years of just blood stain pattern analysis. That's important. Okay. So what did they look for is characteristics, size, type of force, shape of stains. Will tell direction. Taking the glasses back off. Volume, location of patterns, low or high, different types of stains. The properties you want to stick together. Oh, the properties of this is that it sticks together, blood does, and it becomes an adhesive. He's done crime scene reconstruction. He collects the data and puts it into a formula to determine what happened. Then they talked about him teaching in the LE Academy. He has studied entomology, CSI, and scatter investigation 18 years. He was asked to assist in the Abby and Libby case. Yes. He began in February 12th of 2024. He reviewed photos, reports, diagrams, autopsy results, DNA reports, anything that had to do with regarding this case. He went to the scene on April 4th of 2024. April 5th, he examined clothing, jeans, sweatshirt, pink shirt, gray and black bra, canvas shoes, black hoodie. And this is when they started to put photos out, guys. And it got pretty intense pretty quick. So he said the first photo was a diagram of the crime scene. He walked the scene after reviewing the photos. Left dark gray, around tree. Distance between large and small tree. So he's talking about the two trees where the girls were found. There was a large tree and a small tree. And he said the area, he would describe it as a bowl or a depression. The small tree raises in elevation. So there's a raise in elevation by the small tree. The bowl area where the girls were found. So Libby was by the large tree and Abby was by the small tree. So now he starts talking about the small tree and what was found there. Blood-stained tree, yes. Where blood was found, 4 feet from the base. So this is the other small tree that he's talking about. He's talking about the tree that had all the blood on it that the defense says is the F tree. So he's saying the blood was found 4 feet from the base. It was also found on the other side. The right side had additional stains. So what we're talking about is that when Libby stumbled to this tree, it's almost like she grabbed around the tree and blood got there, but then she also put her hand on the tree. He calls it an upside down L. There's also 2 to 3 feet from the tree, northeast of it, there is a big blood stain on the ground. Then there's a closer pic of this tree. Then there's even a closer up pic, which shows blood stains on the tree. 1.37 inches across, 5.9 inches top to bottom. And the additional was less than 1 to 3 milliliters in size. Round spatter. He called it transfer stain because Libby was coming in contact with the tree. And if you remember the DNA evidence I just went through, it showed that all of the blood on the tree was Libby's. Right of center, there was another transfer stain. upside down L. Around it is blood spatter. And then around the tree, there's other blood. Then they showed another picture. Blood stain from 2 feet of base, transfer stain. Blood was accumulating. And when it accumulates, it becomes darker. Then he talked about glucocrystal light. Stained blood will show out the contrast. So it's an enhancement to better see the blood. He said the stain in the middle was very square stain. To the right, margins are uniform. And he said this is a pattern transfer reacting to blood. So in the next picture, they showed a photo of this chemical being applied. The north side, 2 feet above base, it was more bluish, and he called it a transfer stain. Um, 2 feet northeast of the tree, there was another accumulation of blood, larger than drips, pooled, but did not accumulate. But he noted it as voluminous. So 3 and 4 are evidence markers. The right side of the small tree, upside L. 4 was blood stain, small accumulation, and 3 had a larger pool of blood. He said the largest pool is pool of blood that coagulated, meaning it clotted and started to separate. Thank God that was just a diagram. Then we got into actual pictures of the girls again. The body of Libby and Abby shows the stains under Libby's right leg. So on the ground, there is a trail of blood going towards the girls on the ground. And it extends outwards to LG. And it was on the leaves. Some of the leaves and the branches were stained. Then they showed a blood mass further towards LG that continues on. Libby's right leg had a blood stain on the leaves where she was laid. She had blood on the bottom of her feet, and he called that transfer. Bloody object with foot walking on blood, meaning she had been bleeding and it had fell on the ground and she walked on it, and that's how she got blood on her foot. If you're looking down on Libby, the lower torso, blood with flow patterns. Alter stains complex. The pattern flows upright, going downward through the flow pattern. So the neck and chest and face show flow patterns. going down to the right side. The blood on the hands was coagulating and dry. Right eye, left hand, blood coagulated. This was a transfer stain on her wrist. Says the branches were removed and there's a close shot. Blood and flow stain on face. Some moisture mixed in, meaning tears. There was pooling located by the right hand. Left something, dried blood flow pattern. Left hand, voluminous amount transferred. Right thigh, voluminous drips with subsequent flow. Projected pattern, projected from wound, down the leg. So, down onto the legs. So, he said the only way that could have happened is if she was bleeding from her wound. The only way that pattern would have gotten on her leg is if she had been sitting. That is how they know that she was sitting at the base of that tree. So he said the projected pattern, their scallops, arms, has energy, and because you're cardiovascular, your heart is pumping, it pumps out blood faster. Now, on her face, she had an altered blood pattern. She has alteration on object or movement, legs, torso, wiped or swiped through blood. The blood from the eye down was lighter. The blood on the nose going down to right cheek. Gravity occurred where head was lower than the wound. Indicates movement after unconsciousness or death. So what he's stating there is that at some point, her wound on her neck was higher than her head. And he's stating that that happened when the individual drug her head fell back, and her neck was higher than her head. And because of this, it caused certain patterns on her face. And that's how they can induce that she was moved after being unconscious or died. So the leg had blood staining, the right leg, blood on side along backside. Wounds are sticky. After moved, little blood on leaves, no longer bleeding. So they were talking about being drugged. How come there's no marks of her being drugged? And the guy said this: there's multiple layers of sticks and leaves on the ground. And because of that, they found leaves stuck to the back of Libby. So that's how they know she was drugged, even though there's no actual physical drag marks in the dirt. It's because there was multiple layers, and only the top layer would have been removed. I hope that makes sense. And after she was moved, there was a little bit of blood on the leaves. Abby. There was a small pooling to the right of her shoulder, left side of the neck, sweatshirt, saturated. He called this a pugilistic pose. I had to ask what that was. I did not know. It's a boxer stance. So when you're boxing, you're like this, right? One hand is usually up higher than the other. Well, that is how that's how Abby was found. But her arms were close to her body in this position. The sleeves were pulled up over her hands. Okay. So that's the reason there was no blood on her hands. And no blood on her sleeves or arms. But at the time of the autopsy, she did have blood on her sleeves and her arms. And he said that is because they took her clothes off. And some of the blood from the clothes got on her hands and on the sleeve when they took it off. They said they were carried out with a cart, put in a bag, and moved. Blood was wet and dry. Movement could affect blood. More could transfer by moving them. He said the removal of the shirt would change the pattern. She had a spot on her chin, a flow pattern on her chin, not consistent with final resting place. Wound over chin, meaning blood, and went into her mouth. Right hand had no blood. Torso exposed. So what they did is they took the shirt off and was looking at her torso. It was absence of blood on the gray bra or shirt. Was wearing it when she passed away. And the reason they know that is because of how the blood was on her. They knew that it saturated the shirt. So she was dressed when she was passed away. So they had a close-up, and they were looking at her chin. He said moved saturation stain on sweatshirt, not on sleeve. He said that at some point, Abby's head went back. The blood on the tree, all the blood is Libby's. He said he's accustomed seeing blood on hands. Libby, where injured, moved to the tree, succumbed at the base of the tree, and was dragged to her final spot. He said that due to the topography and this bowl, that they would be less visible from the creek. and he was talking about Libby especially. Abby injured and succumbed at location. She was laying down when she was stabbed. Lack of blood is unusual. She didn't die immediately. Never seen it where no blood was on the hands. At least transfer stained. He said that this could have been due to the fact that she was bound, unconscious, or restrained. Was wearing clothes at time. Saturated on sweatshirt. No transfer blood on body. And alter stains on mouth and chin. Saw no other signs. So then he started talking about core body temp. Okay. And how you would obtain the temperature and calculate it. So it's 1.5 every hour the body cools. He said the normal way that you would take a core temperature, body temperature at the crime scene is to do a rectal temp. And then he was asked, should they have done a core body temp there? And he said, no. He said, for one, inserting it could create injury or affect any potential DNA tests done to that area. So this is a big contention with the defense. They wanted to know why a temperature was not done there at the scene to try to determine how long the girls had been unalived. Then they talked about predation. Animal activity consumes deceased people. Now, remember, this guy is an expert in entomology. And he said it's how it is affected by they need a blood source, right? And he started talking about the blowfly. And he said they normally go in the mouth, ears, or eyes. Flies detect decaying or blood, and they go and lay their eggs. There was no blowfly activity. He said the reason for that is because there is no activity unless it's above 51 degrees. And blowflies are not active at night. They're more active later in the morning. Then he was asked about predation activity. Because the girls were out there for so long, and they asked him if he was surprised that no animals had touched the girls. And he said no. And the reason was, he said, he has gone to other crime scenes where bodies have been out for weeks and have no animal activity. He says you're looking at coyotes, rats, possums, other things. At this time, the temperatures were cooler and the smell of decomposition wasn't as prevalent as it is in the hotter months. And there's not a lot of odor. And he said because the lower elevation by the water, it hampers the predation. Then he was asked the number required to unalive, and it was objected, and they said it's outside of his area of expertise. And now the defense objected to this. And the prosecution made a great case for it to be allowed in because he is a crime scene investigator. He's done all of this. And the judge overruled it. He says at least one person committed the crime. It's absolutely possible that only one person did it. Well, then it was the defense's turn. She started off. Now, this is the best cross-examination I've heard from the defense yet, and you'll see why. She starts out with a bang. She said, you said at least one person committed the crime. Could more than one person have committed it? And he said he couldn't rule that out. She said, February 2024, you started the case, 7 years after the crime had been committed. In 2017, you were in the same place, same location, doing the same thing. And he said, yes. And he said, and she said, and you were not asked to come in 2017 to look at this case. And he said, no, he was not asked to come in. And she said, you had to use photos. And he said, yes. And she said, and force can change. And he said, yes. And then she said, the location in the bowl, you called it a depression area. Is that the lowest part there in the woods? And he said he could not say it was the lowest, but it was in that particular scene. And he said yes. He didn't walk the entire forest, so he didn't recall seeing areas lower. Then she talked about the blood tree transfer. And he said, and she said, do you know that it's actually observed as the F tree? And he said, yes. And then she asked if Liberty was mobile when her neck was first cut. And he said, yes. She was mobile afterwards. And he said, yes. And she said there would have been blood flowing down, lots of blood. And he said, yes. And you found several areas where this blood was. Yes. And you know that she was sitting at the base of the tree. He said, yes. And you believe she was moved to where she was found. He said, yes. She asked if, are you aware of Libby's weight? And he said, yes, I remember her height, but I'm not sure about her weight. And OJ said she was about 200 pounds. And then she showed him State's Evidence 36, the picture. And she's like, and you're saying that Libby was drugged here? And he said, yes. And she said, why? By the leaves between the tree and where she was found? He said, yes. She's like, but there's no marks showing that she was drugged. And that's where he said the leaves on the body, on her back, that were stuck to her back, shows she was drugged. Then she asked about the flow pattern on the face, not consistent with the resting spot. That's when he said, at that point, when she was drugged, at some point, her head fell back and her neck was higher than her head. Lifted to have neck lower than body. Died where she was. And now he's talking about Abby. She's questioning about Abby. Died where she was. Yes. And at some point, her torso and neck were raised. And he said there was a positioning change, or she was turned. At some point, her chin was below her neck. And he said yes. And then she said, and the body never moved. And he said no. Then she showed him diagram 20. And she says, do you feel it's important to document all pieces of an investigation? He said yes. Any marks identifying? He said yes. And she said, and there's no indication of any drag marks. And he agreed. And she said Libby was nude. And Libby was nude to see across the river. I don't know if I wrote that right, but he said yes. Oh, so she was talking about, could you see Libby nude? I think from across the river or something like that. And she said, and from the cemetery you could see her. And he said, I disagree. Then they talked placement of concealment based on viewer discretion. And he said yes. So based on wherever the person was, and the fact that he tried to conceal them, the viewer may or may not have seen them. And then she asked him, well, if he truly wanted to conceal her, couldn't he have just used leaves? And he said yes. And she said sticks. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. They asked what percentage the girls were covered by sticks. And he said very small percentage for both girls. And she said, you analyzed these drag marks? And he said, yes. And she said, would you have used evidence markers to show the drag marks? And he said, yes. And would you have notated on the diagram that there was drag marks? And he said, yes. And then she said, did you talk to Lieutenant Holman? And he said, no. And then she said the lack of blood, something about the lack of blood. Oh, there was a lack of blood on Abby's hands. And he said, correct. She said, could this be because multiple people were there holding her down? And he said, yes. And she said, what about if they washed her hands? And he said he couldn't rule it out. Then they got into the photo of the cartridge again, okay? And when it should be documented and when it shouldn't be documented. And this is where he explained to her that in a controlled setting is the only time that document or that bullet, that cartridge should be handled. That when you're out in the field, you would photograph it where it lays, and you would not photograph or videotape normally the process to pick it up. but you would in the controlled setting of the lab. You would then take a photo of it. He said you would never manipulate it. Always document it, collect it, label it, and then examine it further in a controlled setting. And she said, so you would have just taken it off the ground and put it in the envelope? And he said, yes. And then she said, would you have taken a photo of that? He says, you could. And then she asked, did you find anything that linked R.A., Richard Allen, to this scene? And he said, no. So then the prosecutor got back up and he said, by looking at all the photos, do you believe Liberty was dragged? He said, yes. And then he asked, why? And the guy said, the blood staining from where she was to where she ended up and the area on her leg shows staining as if she was drugged through a puddle of blood. And then he talked about the multiple layers may not see drag marks. He stated that the arm above was not natural and that he felt that the reason her arm was above her head is because she was pulled or dragged by the arm. And then they asked him about Libby's position when her thigh was stained. And he said her leg had to be on the ground. She was sitting in order to get that flow pattern. And they asked how many times was she stabbed? And he said at least 3 times. He said when her head went back, her face would have been below the neck. She's being dragged. Her upper torso and head falls back. And it leaves an adhesive, sticky structure because the blood was coagulating and drying. And the leaves were stuck on her back. That shows a sign of dragging. And he said, remember, this is a thick layer of leaves and sticks. And that's why he talked about just the top part of it being pulled up and on her and it not looking like anything else was disturbed. Upside down L. He said he did not find that this was an F because the lower part didn't connect. And the hue was rich in color. He said it was a separate transfer stain. Libby's voluminous stains, height, her hand, which had blood. So he's stating that when she got stabbed, she cupped her neck and put her hand on the tree. And he said not only her hand, but it could have been a piece of her arm too. And then they asked, can SA occur without DNA? And he said yes. And then they stated Libby was Libby inflicted the same time as Abby. He said it could be different times. Not as okay. They asked him, were all of her wounds inflicted at the same time? He said it could have been at different times. There was a tremendous amount of blood. So then the defense gets up there, and Auger says, your hypothesis that you're proposing how this went. And he said, yes. And she said, you have no idea how blood got on the tree. And he said, yes. And she said, and that's because you only looked at the photos. And he said, yes. And then she said, do you believe taking pics of things is more important? He said, yes. And then they talked about the injuries at the different times. He said he couldn't rule that out, nor rule out that it happened at the same time. And he couldn't rule out that they were killed at the same time or different times. And then the attorneys asked to approach the bench. And this is where the bombshell was laid for the day, end of day. Nick McClellan stood up and said that he would like to enter into evidence a Google search for Richard Allen. Now, we didn't get the whole email address, but we did get Fujak AO could have been 19 at gmail.com. And he wanted to admit these records into evidence. Now, the defense objected and quoted Watson versus State. This was a case where the defendant was charged for assaulting the stepdaughter. There were internet searches of a sexual nature, but they were required to show that he was the only person who had access. And they knew that the victim and him shared a tablet. So they could not prove that no one else had access. And Gull said, okay, do you have any other information for me? And she was told no. So she said she would take it under advisement and that she needed to look into it before she made a decision. And the only thing the defense said is that Kathy had access to the computer. And then Rozzy said that he had some tech issues to discuss. And so they all went back in the corner, had the white noise on, and made their discussion. And then Gull came back and said she granted the motion to quash the request for Ives to come testify, and that we could all have a good day. So I thought the way that Auger asked some of the questions about if it could be more than one person was done in the correct way. And that is based off of other actual trials that I've seen where they've done a third-party defense. Okay, so for Jack AO was in the Discovery Index from way back. Yes. Now that you mention that, I kind of remember seeing that, but it's not something that's stuck in my head. So, we're going to have to wait and see how Judge Gull rules on this, and then find out, hopefully, what kind of internet searches these were. These were Google searches. So, that is going to be interesting. Because this is late in the game, and McClellan is just now trying to get this in. I really am too, Ivy. Especially since he said he thought it was multiple transfers. But he said to him it looked more like an upside down L. I disagree with Abby being held down or her hands being washed. The blood would show evidence of dilution with water. You would think so. Let's see here. And that's what I thought too. If she had been held down, you would have seen some kind of mark or bruising, and none of that was found. And I think you're right. She could have been passed out. Well, thank you. I try to do my best with these notes. Um, Sometimes I confuse myself by what I write, but most of the time I can figure it out. I cried at the break. That's how I'm getting through it. Um, I can't unsee any of this. I wish I could. It's horrific knowing what they went through, and it breaks my heart to see the families crying when they have to see this and know what these girls went through. I don't know if it's better to know or better not to know. So I'm hoping the Google searches are revealed. Yeah, I think you have a point there too that there was a lot of people out there searching. Thank you so much for the super sticker, Cincy. I appreciate it. This is what I'm waiting for too, Karen. Big time. Absolutely big time. Waiting for those confessions. The context. What he said. When he said it. All right. So I just have to say that what the YouTubers are doing is they are putting out to their um audiences, subscribers, members, if you would like to come out and you're around the Delphi area, if you would like to come out and sit at night for me so that I can get some sleep. Andrea has posted it on the Facebook group, and you can put it in the comments underneath it. I do have somebody who's sitting there for me tonight so that I can actually get more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I should say more than 2 hours of sleep. Most nights it's 2 hours of sleep. Last night I got 5. So tonight I'll get more and I'll get to sleep in a bed and stay warm. No, there was no blood on the sleeves for Abby. He specifically made that clear. So I hope that helps. No, I was too busy taking notes. My little hand was so cramped at the end of the day, it wasn't even funny. Yeah, I know. There's so many things that run through our head after we hear this stuff, and it's like, oh crap. Yes, so somebody is sitting for me so I can sleep at least till 4 a.m. and then go down there, and 4 or 5 a.m. and then go down there and get in line. So um I took cushions off the patio furniture last night. They were already in the garage, and I took them last night and I made myself a little bed on the cement, and I had like 3 or 4 blankets on me, and I was dressed in multiple layers. Um and that's the only way I stayed warm and was able to get that 5 hours of sleep. So, um thank you all for watching. Please hit the like, share, subscribe. Um, and if you got any questions, you don't understand something, put it in the comments underneath the video. I will try to get you the answers if I don't already have them. But I will get an answer for you. Yeah, clothes were wet. Yes. And yes. So tomorrow night, I may just do my live stream from the courthouse and just stay. It's about the only thing I can do. So we'll see. Um, I don't know how you're getting even 10 minutes of sleep. When I'm asleep, I'm asleep. I don't hear the train. I don't hear the people. Nothing. Do you know if there's anybody who's sharing the written notes? Um, yeah, you can get food delivered to me at the courthouse. Absolutely. I think the only reason people aren't sharing their notes is because I don't know that you'd be able to read them. I'd be more than happy to take pictures of them, and you can try to decipher them. Drugged meaning not drugs. Drugged by your hand across the landscape. I guess you could probably call around and see who delivers. I don't know if anybody delivers. Dragged, yeah, not drugged. Well, Ivy, I can I can try to tomorrow night. I'll take pictures of my notes and I'll put them in the Discord. And then you can see if you could try to read them. Here's hoping. Thank you so much for the super sticker and the donation. Your donations are helping. They're helping to get me food while I'm sitting there, gas, and everything that I need while I'm there. So I really, really appreciate it. All right, everybody, I'm going to get out of here, and I'll see you tomorrow night with tomorrow's update. Thanks, Ivy, and everyone else. Love you all. Have a good night. Thank you for watching Beyond the Evidence. Today, I gave you my own opinions and analysis, but I always encourage you to do your own research and form your own conclusions. If you're interested in true crime and want to join me on this journey of discovery, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of my uploads. If you'd like to support the channel, join our membership, and if you have any suggestions for cases that you want me to cover, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice matters. This is Beyond the Evidence, and I'll see you in the next video.